a global network of advising centers from the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. We give unbiased, accurate, and comprehensive information about the full range of accredited U.S. higher education institutions, as well as free access to introductory information on U.S. study. So for those of you who are watching us from Mexico, here we have 25 centers. But for those of you who are across the world, we have 450 centers worldwide in around 180 countries. So now let's begin on standardized testing for undergraduate admissions.
All right, so to get started, we want to think about the different components of an application that colleges and universities consider. So college admissions officers really are trying to get a complete picture of who students are, what they'll bring to their campuses, and how they will do on their campuses. The typical components to a college application that are considered by colleges are your high school grades, the courses that you took, your extracurricular activities, recommendation letters, applications, test scores. And although different schools have different policies and guidelines for admissions, what we just described here really refers to what we call a holistic approach to college admissions. And this type of admissions process is usually followed by the more selective schools. So less selective schools like community colleges or universities with rolling admissions, meaning they accept applications at any point during the academic year, are the kinds of institutions that might admit students solely based on good grades or good standardized test scores. It ultimately comes down to what kind of schools you apply to and the resources they have available for their admissions office. So college admissions tests or college entrance exams are designed to measure a student's skill set and are used by colleges to help them determine how ready students are for work at a college level. The SAT, SAT subject tests, and the ACT are the three standard tests that are recognized and in most cases required by colleges and universities as part of your application for enrollment. Different universities place varying amounts of importance to different aspects of a college application, so it's important that you conduct as much independent research as you can about each school so that you apply to, so that you can determine what aspects of the application they value the most, and then make sure that these aspects of your application are the most showcased.
Okay, so with the exemption of some community colleges with open enrollment, most of U.S. colleges will ask international students for a college readiness standardized test. By college readiness standardized test, they refer to either the SAT or the ACT, both of which measure how prepared is the student to enter to a U.S. college. Furthermore, some colleges also require SAT subject tests. The subject tests are intended for students who want to show their strengths or interests in specific areas. There are around 20 subject tests which correspond to any of these following categories: English, mathematics, history, science, and languages. While subject tests can improve the student's credentials, if the scores are not good enough, they could be more detrimental than not having them. Since they are designed for students to show their strengths, colleges expect strong results from the students. Now, on the other hand, non-native English speaker international students will be required to do an English proficiency test, which is either the TOEFL or the IELTS. So international students from the UK or any other English-speaking countries will not require this test, but any other student will. Now, for some colleges, the SAT or ACT will be enough to demonstrate the English proficiency, and thus they might exempt you from doing the TOEFL or the IELTS. However, in most of the cases, you will be asked to do both. The TOEFL and the IELTS essentially measure the student's ability to understand and use English at a college level. They both evaluate reading, listening, speaking, and writing skills. However, they do not do it in the same way. We'll look at the difference of these tests later on.
So now we will start going into some of the differences between the SAT and the ACT, starting with a really basic overview of the SAT exam. First off, it's important to note that the SAT is an exam that is designed to measure your ability rather than your knowledge. It specifically tests to see how good the test taker's reasoning skills are. As far as the structure of the SAT goes, it is a 3-hour test that contains 3 main sections: writing, critical reading, and math. as well as an optional 50-minute long essay section. Although most schools that require it will ask that you take the test with the essay at least once, meaning that if you decide to take the SAT exam more than once, you only have to take it with the optional essay once. This essay will be scored separately out of 8 in 3 different categories: reading, analysis, and writing, while the exam itself will be scored out of a total of 1,600 points. As far as the cost for the exam go, with the essay section, the price is around $105 US, and without it, around 88. So for the formatting of the test, it is broken down into 3 main different sections: evidence-based reading and writing, mathematics, and the optional essay. The evidence-based reading and writing section of the SAT will ask you to analyze, synthesize, and interpret data from a wide range of sources. These sources might include informational graphics such as tables, charts, and graphs, as well as multi-paragraph passages in the areas of literature, literary nonfiction, the humanities, science, history, and social studies. For every passage or pair of passages you'll see during the reading portion of the test, at least one question will ask you to identify which part of the text best supports the answer to the previous question, so you will not be able to answer these questions without answering the previous one. In other instances, you'll be asked to find the best answer to a question by pulling together information conveyed in words and graphics. The writing portion of the test also focuses on what is called command of evidence. It will ask you to analyze a series of sentences or paragraphs and decide if they make sense. Other questions will ask you to interpret graphs and to edit a part of the accompanying passage so that it clearly and accurately communicates the information in the graphs. Multiple choice questions on the math section will require that you use ratios, percentages, and proportional reasoning to solve problems. Some questions will also focus on testing mastery of linear equations and systems. The picture on the right here is an example of a question from the student-produced response math section. And here you can see how you would answer by filling in the corresponding bubble for each digit of your answer, and also writing it out at the top of each column.
Alright, so now let's take a look to the ACT. The ACT stands for American College Test and is the other college readiness and academic achievement standardized test. The ACT lasts 2 hours and 55 minutes without the writing section. So if the writing section were to be included, it would last 3 hours and 35 minutes, meaning that you would have 40 minutes for the writing section. The ACT is graded out of 36 points, while the writing section is graded separately out of 12 points. The cost varies each year. As of now, an international student would have to pay around $120 US with the writing section, and $103.5 US without it. Now, as far as the format goes, the ACT has 4 mandatory multiple choice sections which are always presented in the same order: English, math, reading, and science. There's also an optional writing section for a total of 5 test sections. If you want more advice on the writing section of the ACT and SAT, you can look at our previous webinar on standardized writing sections. Now, for the English section, there are 2 main types of questions: ones that test usage and/or mechanics of the language, and ones that test rhetorical skills. Among the first category, you should expect questions that will evaluate a correct use of punctuation marks, verb tenses, clauses, relative pronouns, among other things. When it comes to the use of rhetorical skills, questions will focus on how well you can reword or add information, how much sense do the transitions between sentences make, and how concise can the ideas be expressed. Now, for the reading part, you will be generally asked to respond to or interpret the given passages. The 4 passages that you will encounter are going to be completely different. There is going to be a fiction passage, a science one focusing on social sciences, and lastly, one centered on humanities. Questions will generally evaluate how well you can identify the meaning of a word in a specific context, how well you understood the overall point of the passage, how the argument is developed throughout the passage, and what can you logically conclude from that passage. Now, when it comes to the math section, questions can be independent from each other, while others will be linked as a set of questions. Thus, it is very important to pay a lot of attention to these types of questions, because if you get one wrong, you might as well get all the others wrong. Math is the only section that contains 5 possible answers for each question, making it slightly more difficult. And lastly, math questions will cover topics that range from pre-algebra to trigonometry. And finally, the science section, which is the one different section from the SAT, for example, comprises a combination of passages, charts, and graphs. The science section can contain topics from biology, chemistry, and physics. These questions are not really testing your prior knowledge in these fields, so you don't need to worry studying for biology or chemistry. They rather want to test how well you can interpret the data that is presented.
Alright, so now that we've gone over each test, we will compare them and take a look at some of the differences between them. Right off the bat, we can see that the ACT is slightly shorter in the overall amount of time it takes to complete the test. So it has less time allotted overall for each section, even though there are more questions. We can also see here that another major difference between the two tests is the scale that they are graded out of. While the SAT grades each section out of 800 for a grand total of 1,600 points, the ACT grades each section out of 36, and then uses the average of the 4 section scores as the overall or composite score. The essays are also graded slightly different, with the SAT out of 8 for 3 different categories, while the ACT gives a single score out of 12. Although for both of the tests, the essay is graded completely separately from the rest of the exam. So here we have a comparison of how the timing works out in the SAT and the ACT per question. And as I've already mentioned, we can see here that for the ACT, in order to answer all the questions in each section, you have less time per question than on the SAT. It's highly encouraged that you take practice tests so you can decide which kind of test you will perform better on. If after taking a practice ACT test, you find that you really cannot get through all the questions, the SAT might be a better fit for you as a test taker, or vice versa. If you find that you can perform well on the science section of the ACT, you might want to consider it instead.
So now let's take a look at how the ACT score should be interpreted. There are 2 very important concepts that need to be taken into account. On one hand, there is the composite. The composite score is the average of the 4 test scores. If the average has decimals, it will be rounded to the nearest whole number. Now, this does not mean that you will not receive individual scores for each section. You will receive those as well. The composite just reflects your overall performance in the test. Another concept that needs to be known is the percentile. The percentile reveals what percent of the norm group was equal or less than your performance. So, for example, if you are in the 25th percentile, then your score was better than 25% of the test takers. So a percentile is not a grade, it is just a comparison on how well you did amongst the other students. Finally, let's take a look at superscoring. So superscoring is a policy by which admissions officers consider your highest section scores from any test date you took, either the ACT or the SAT. If you take the ACT or the SAT more than once, then the schools that use superscoring will take your highest critical reading score and highest math score and highest writing score. This in the case of the SAT. Similarly with the ACT and its respective sections. When added, the superscore might be higher than what you got in one sitting, and sometimes might reflect better what kind of student you are. Now, let's take a look at a sample ACT score report. As you can see, at the top you will find your score breakdown. So first you can see the composite, and then the respective scores for each section, including also an average for the STEM-related sections, which are science and math, and an average for the English and language sections, which are English, reading, and writing. You can also see some benchmarks the ACT sets regarding college readiness. These are the purple lines above or below the scores in the score range chart. In the middle, you can see how your scores are compared to other students in the country and in the state. For an international student, the score report will include the comparison between the US student and among other international students. And finally, at the bottom you can see a more detailed breakdown of each section score. For instance, in the math section, it includes the student's performance in algebra, geometry, functions, and all the other categories.
We've already established that a percentile basically reveals the percentage of students whose test scores fall at or below your performance on the test. A percentile will always be a number between 1 and 99 that is used to show how you scored in comparison to other students. So for example, a test taker in the 57th percentile scored higher than or equal to 57% of test takers. On the SAT score report, there are two different kinds of percentiles that are referenced: the nationally representative sample and the user percentile. The nationally representative sample percentile compares your score to the scores of typical 11th and 12th grade US students, while the SAT user percentile compares your scores to the scores of typical college-bound US 11th and 12th grade SAT takers. In other words, you should expect your SAT user percentile to be lower than the nationally representative sample percentile. Here we have a sample SAT score report. As we can see, the score report will indicate an overall score out of 1600, in this case, 1010. And underneath this, we can see the two different percentiles that I just mentioned, next to which you can see the essay score out of 8 for each of the three categories. Underneath the total score, there are two section scores, one for evidence-based reading and writing and one for math, each with the two different percentiles we mentioned. We can also take notice that there is either a check mark or an exclamation point, which indicates if you performed at the average benchmark level or not. You should aim to see check marks and not exclamation points on your score report. Finally, at the bottom, we see a breakdown of scores based on different categories from the test, like command of evidence, expression of ideas, problem solving, and data analysis. These scores are really quite helpful because they show exactly on what kinds of questions you did better or worse on. And if you decide to retake the test, you can see where improvements need to be made.
All right, let's move into sending the test scores. At the moment you sign up for the ACT, you will have the option to select up to 4 colleges to whom you wish to send the scores to. The service is free. However, if you want to send scores to more than 4 colleges, then you need to pay a $13 fee per test date per school. Now, if you put 4 colleges, but then you change your mind about one, want to send the test score to another college, you can change it even after you took the test, but before you received the score. Now, for the SAT, you also have the option to select up to 4 colleges to send your scores for free. You can choose these colleges at the time you registered or up to 9 days after the test date. In order to send an additional score, you would need to cover a $12 fee per report. Now, one final point that needs to be clarified is that when you select the schools you want the scores to be sent to, you will not see the scores before they are sent. Basically, you and the school will receive the scores at the same time. Alright, now we'll share some useful tips for standardized test taking. Firstly, try to answer by elimination. Sometimes seeing 4 options might be a burden. Try to reduce the number of possible answers to facilitate it. Second, be sure to answer everything. Even if you don't have time to read a question, select an answer. There is no longer a penalty for guessing on college exams. What this means is that you get 1 point for a right answer and 0 points for either an omitted question or a wrong answer. So you should always try to make an educated guess to maximize your number of correct answers. Now, you should look for contrast words in sentences and passages. Contrast words can create powerful links between the ideas and can help understand the logic of the passage. Next, when doing the reading sections, it is helpful to skim the passage first to get an idea of what it is about. Then go and read the questions, and then read the passage attentively, looking for the answers to the questions you just read. Next, look for direct evidence. If you can detect clear evidence in the passage, it will be easier to determine the answer. Another important thing to do during the exam is manage your time appropriately. Keep a good pace. If you have trouble with one question, be sure to not get stuck on it. Continue answer the rest of the questions and go back at the end to solve it. When reading the questions, do not try to answer before you have finished reading it. Sometimes questions are made so that an answer might seem right if you just read a portion of the question. So read all to ensure that you are answering correctly. And finally, once you are done, If you have time, go back and check your answers. Though you might be tired at the end, be sure to give an extra those few last minutes and check everything. You can both spot a mistake or just be more confident of what you answered.
So now that we have gone over the basics of the SAT and ACT, as well as some test-taking tips, we want to go over how to register for the SAT. The table on the right here shows us the available dates for international SAT administration. The SAT is offered internationally in October, December, March, and May. SAT subject tests are available internationally in October, November, December, May, and June. Not all subject tests are available on each test date, so be sure to register for dates that offer the specific subject test you are looking to take. Most scores are released online about 2 weeks after the test date. It's highly recommended that you register earlier rather than later, otherwise you might have to pay an additional fee to take the test. So you should consult the link below to check for dates and register. Similarly to the SAT, it's important you consult the ACT's website so you can see the dates and test centers available and make sure that a testing center exists in your country. While colleges and universities accept both the SAT and ACT equally, not all countries have testing centers, and not all testing centers administer the ACT on every testing date. So we encourage you to check out the link below for more information.
All right, so now we've talked a lot about the SAT and the ACT. Let's move to the English proficiency test. So let's start by registration. As we mentioned earlier, the TOEFL is a basic English proficiency exam required for all international students in order to apply to the US. The process of registration is pretty straightforward. So as you can see in the image, to register, you should first select the country where you want to take the exam in. The TOEFL is administered in many countries and has many different test dates, so you would surely find one that accommodates you. Now, the cost of the TOEFL varies from country to country, ranging approximately from $160 to $250. A safe bet would be to expect paying around $200 for it. If you want more information on test dates and centers, you can visit the link that is shown below. Now, for the IELTS exam, the process of registration is very similar. When entering the website, you will see that there are 2 types of exam. One is the IELTS Academic and the other the IELTS General Training. You want to select the IELTS Academic, as it is the one intended for students. The IELTS is offered in 140 countries at around 1,200 different testing centers, so you will surely find one that is appropriate for you. The IELTS cost varies per country, and sometimes it can even vary within that country. The fees for Mexico range from $178 to $190. If you want more information on the IELTS, please visit the link that is shown below.
Alright, so now we're going to move on to talking about the TOEFL IELTS format. So here we can see a breakdown of the 4 sections in the TOEFL exam: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. The time limit for each section, the number of questions, and what specific tasks you will be asked to complete. For the reading section, you will be asked to read 3 or 4 passages or academic texts and answer questions based on those. For the listening section, you will be asked to answer questions based on audio of lectures, classroom discussions, and conversations. For the speaking section, you will have to verbally express an opinion. And for the writing section, you will be asked to write essay responses in which you support an opinion. Now, for the format of the IELTS test, it's as follows for each section. The listening section consists of listening to 4 recorded monologues and conversations. The writing section asks that you complete a couple of tasks, including writing at least 150 words to summarize, describe, or explain some kind of graph, like a table, chart, or so on. The reading section contains 3 long passages which can range from factual to analytical and can include visuals like graphs and illustrations. And finally, a speaking component that requires an interview in which you speak about a familiar topic. It is important to note that one of the main differences between the TOEFL and the IELTS is that in the TOEFL, the speaking section is completed with a computer, while the speaking section in the IELTS exam is completed face-to-face with an interviewer. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Now let's take a look at how these exams are scored. The TOEFL IBT is scored out of 120 points. There are 4 sections in the exam: reading, listening, speaking, and writing, and each one is scored out of 30 points, making the total sum of those sections the 120 points total score. Now, of course, you should aim for the 120 points, but keep in mind that the score that you need depends on the institution you are applying to, if they ask for a minimum score at all. There is no passing or failing grade in the TOEFL itself. Now, once received the score, it has a validity of 2 years. The limited validity of the score is calculated based on the expected decline of language proficiency if it is not practiced frequently. Now, the scoring of the IELTS is a bit different. It is reported as band scores on a scale from 0 to 9 for each of its 4 components. Each component is actually graded on a different scale. However, they are all converted to the 0 to 9 scale. As you can see in the table, each band score represents the student domain of English. For a score of 9, we can see in the second column that the student is labeled as an expert user. If we look at the description, we see that the test taker has fully operational command of the language and uses English accurately and fluently. Now, for each band score, we can see how the skill level changes from expert to very good user to good user and to competent user for their scores from 9 to 6. We will see in a moment the rest of the band scores. If we look at the descriptions, we can notice keyword changes from the first description, depending on the band score. For example, in number 8, we can see that the student has fully operational command of the language, just as in the score of 9, but in this case with occasional unsystematic inaccuracies. And similarly, as we continue to go down the scores, we see that the student might also have inappropriate usage and misunderstanding in some situations, and so on. So here are the rest of the band scores and the skill level and the respective descriptions for this, which hopefully you will study hard and avoid getting one of these scores. But at the core, these scores show a limitation in the usage and understanding of English in both spoken and written communication.
Alright, so finally we want to leave you with some helpful links and resources. The first 4 links can help you prepare for the ACT and SAT. The first link actually has some free sample tests that you can take to help you practice. And the links below those contain helpful tips on how to register for tests, how to interpret your scores, and strategies to help you answer questions. Thank you for tuning into the webinar. Please get in touch with your nearest Education USA Advising Center or email us with questions.
We'll stick around some minutes for the questions, so please be sure to ask. So we see a question that asks if there are fee waivers for the TOEFL exam, and for international students there are not. There are none. There are only some reduction services for United States students. So no, at least not directly from the TOEFL exam. Now they're asking, is it very difficult to get an 8 on the IELTS? Well, of course, if you practice and you study, it shouldn't be that difficult. I mean, it's the highest score is 9, so 9 should be the most difficult one. But still, it shouldn't be that difficult. If you have a good domain of English and you practice it frequently, it should be fine.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, there are some schools that will actually take, if you do really well on the English and writing sections of the SAT or the ACT, there are some schools that will waive the requirement for the IELTS or the TOEFL. So if you perform well on those, on the ACT or ACT, the written English or the reading sections, you should do fine on either the IELTS or the TOEFL exam.
All right. Well, just as a reminder, oh well, wait. So they're asking which test did you present for your Chicago app? I presented the TOEFL exam, and I did it after the SAT, so it was pretty easy. Essentially, if you study hard for the SAT, the TOEFL shouldn't be that much of a problem. If you do the TOEFL first, however, you should study hard for it, but with frequent practice, it should be fine. And also, how much time is encouraged to spend preparing for both ACT and TOEFL tests? Well, that really depends on how you study in general, how what a kind of student are you. So I don't know if I would recommend strongly doing the practice test that you can found online. That will give you an idea of how much you can aspire to score, and also will give you practice to increase those scores from time to time.
Yeah, I think it also varies on, what your starting level is. So, like we said, we recommend taking a practice test, and then from there you can determine, how much more you need to study. If you take a practice exam and find that you did really poorly in the math section, but did excellent in the reading section, then you know that you need to spend some time studying the math, but maybe not so much the reading. So it really just comes down to where you are, and the only way to gauge that is to take some practice exams first.
Well, then probably, well, if you got a 27, you might have done like really well in the language section. So you need to realize that maybe the math section is the one that is causing troubles to you, and maybe you want to spend some time preparing for that. I really don't want to say like a specific amount of time, because it will really vary from student to student. So I don't know. There are students who can just study 1 week before the exam and do fine. There are others that need to study months before the exam. Really depends, as Valeria said, on where you are, what are your current scores, how much you practice, and that will determine how much time you need to study.
Yeah, so there's another question about scores and get admission to college. So when you are making your list of colleges that you want to apply to, like we said, like a lot of it is also doing independent research, and checking out and seeing what the averages are for schools, right? So you can find information online about like what the average test scores are for admissions, right? But test scores alone won't guarantee an admission. So even if you do really well on the ACT or the SAT, that alone is not enough to get you into like a really selective school. Like we mentioned earlier, and we were talking about like that holistic problem, that holistic approach to college admissions. It's not just about the standardized test scores. It's also about essays. It's about extracurriculars. It's about your grades, what classes you took.
Okay, so for me, the when I took the SAT, I got 1,490 points. So, which is like out of 1,600 is, well, it's not bad, I guess, but it really depends from college to college. I've met people who scored like higher than me and didn't get into even less selected colleges. So don't get too stressed about the score you need for a college. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't study and just go and take the test to see how it goes. No, you should study hard for it. But keep in mind that maybe if you didn't do as well in the exams, you still have a lot of other things in the application that might help you get into college.
Yeah, so for me, I took the SAT. And back when I took it, the SAT was actually graded out of 2,400 points. And I don't remember exactly what I got, but I was in like the 2,250 to 2,300 range. And it wasn't a bad score, but I felt like I could do better. So I actually presented the ACT, and my composite on the ACT, also don't remember exactly what it was, but it was better than how I performed on the SAT. So like I said, it's also really important to determine what kind of test taker you are and figure out if one test is better for you than the other. So we have a question about someone who says that they learned English on their own, but they're unsure about how to prepare. So I think what I would suggest then, if you're planning on taking the SAT or SAT anyway, a lot of the content in the English, in the writing and reading sections is going to be similar to what you see in the TOEFL or the IELTS exam. So if you prepare for those types of questions, I think you do okay on the TOEFL or the IELTS. The other thing is there's also like audio and speaking portions to the exam. So would definitely recommend, I don't know, maybe listening to podcasts or watching movies. Basically just trying to diversify your vocabulary as much as you can, so that when you respond, you also speak not just like fluently, but also eloquently. That there's like a variation in the vocabulary that you're using to respond.
All right, so if there is not any other question, that is all from us. Thank you for watching us today. I'd like to remind you that you can see in our channel other webinars we've done in the past on standardized essays and American culture. So if you're unsure about those topics, you can watch those videos. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a good day.